أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. واستبق الباب وقدت قميصه من دبر وألف يا سيدها لدى الباب قالت ما جزاء من أراد بأهلك سوءا إلا أن يسجن أو عذاب أليم. قال هي راودتني عن نفسي وشهد شاهد من أهلها إن كان قميصه قد من قبل فصدقت وهو من الكاذبين وإن كان قميصه قد من دبر فكذبت وهو من الصادقين فلما رأى قميصه قد من دبر قال إنه من كيدكن إن كيدكن عظيم. يوسف أعرض عن هذا واستغفري لذنبك إنك كنت من الخاطئين. صدق الله العظيم. My dear respected brothers and sisters in Islam, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome back to another weekly weekly Tafsir Halaqah, where we are discussing the Tafsir of the beautiful Surah Yusuf. And in the previous verses, in last week's halaqah, we discussed the incident where the wife of the Aziz of Misr, Zulaykha, had basically attempted to seduce Sayyidina Yusuf alayhi salam, and she had basically taken him into her inner chamber, and she had locked the door, and basically presented herself, inciting Sayyidina Yusuf alayhi salam to commit the act of adultery with her. And Sayyidina Yusuf alayhi salam sought the protection of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and due to that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala showed him a miracle. And we discussed what is the meaning of that sign or that miracle that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala showed him, whether it was the face of his father Sayyidina Yaqub alayhi salam or something else that has been mentioned. In this ayah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala then discusses what happens next. That as soon as Sayyidina Yusuf alayhi salam sees this amazing miracle from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he basically renews his trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and he basically makes a run for it. And one of the reasons for showing him this sign that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala showed him is, again, as we had discussed last week, that Sayyidina Yusuf alayhi salam was also struggling with a non-voluntary tilt that he had also towards her. And this was something that a thought that he could not control, and thus it was not considered to be a sin. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, by showing him that miracle, that sign from his side, even removed that non-voluntary thought as well. So Sayyidina Yusuf alayhi salam makes a run for it, right? He turns around and he runs full speed at the door. And even though the door was locked, he knew that he had to make a run for it. He had to get out of that situation. And Zuleikha turns around and she also begins to chase him, to pull him back, A, in the first case, and B, not to let him escape, in order so that her scheme and her basically plot could be protected and that she would not be outed to the public. But what happens is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala plans in a different way. So what happens is that in her attempt to stop her, she basically grabs on and latches on to the back of his shirt. And she basically is trying to use his shirt to pull him back, and he is, going full force. And as a result of that, his shirt rips from the back. وَقَدَّتْ قَمِيصَهُ مِن دُبُرٍ وَأَلْفَ يَا سَيِّدَهَا لَدَى الْبَابِ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, and miraculously, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala causes the door to open, the lock falls away, as is mentioned in historical narrations. It literally opens up and falls down, and the door is open, and Sayyidina Yusuf alayhi salam escapes, and Zulaykha is trailing behind him. And in this very instance, they come face to face with the Aziz of Misr. They come face to face with Zulaykha's husband and Sayyidina Yusuf alayhi salam's master in this case. And instead of fessing up to the crime that she was attempting to commit, the heinous act of cheating on her husband, of committing adultery with someone else that was not her husband, she immediately turned the tables around. And what did she say? قالت ما جزاء من أراد بأهلك سوءا إلا أن يسجن أو عذاب أليم. That what can be the jaza, or the recompense, or the punishment for the person who intended to do ill towards your wife, meaning that he tried to force himself upon me, he tried to rape he tried to rape me, and he had evil intentions towards me. So his punishment should be that either he should be thrown into prison, or he should be exposed to a very painful punishment, right? So she basically turns the tables around, and she, is acting like he's the one that's the guilty one, and she had basically nothing to do with this, and she's innocent of all of this. So in this case, we see that the response of Sayyidina Yusuf alayhi salam is different. And he, in some cases, Mufassirin mentioned that he might not have outed her, he might have kept her secret, if this was a different circumstance. But she herself not only brought this situation to the fore, but on top of that, she accused Sayyidina Yusuf alayhi salam of this particular thing, which was destructive to his honor. So he responded back by saying, قَالَ هِيَ رَاوَدَتْنِي عَنْ نَفْسِي. That Yusuf alayhi salam said that it was her, it was she who sought to seduce me. She was the one that tried to do this to me. I'm the one that's innocent, she's the one that's guilty. And in the favor of the testimony of Sayyidina Yusuf alayhi salam, Allah says, وَشَهِدَ شَاهِدٌ مِّنْ أَهْلِهَا. That a witness from her own family, from Zulaykha's family, testified on behalf of Sayyidina Yusuf alayhi salam, and testified against her testimony. And not only did they testify, but they made such a compelling argument that in kana qamisuhu qudda min qubul fasadaqat wa huwa min al-kadhibin. That why don't you look at the evidence that's in front of you? Look at his shirt. If his shirt is torn from the front, then she is speaking the truth and he is lying. He's the one that's lying. وَإِنْ كَانَ قَمِيصُهُ قُدَّ مِنْ دُبُرٍ فَكَذَبَتْ وَهُوَ مِنَ الصَّادِقِينَ. And if his shirt is torn from the front or from the back, then it is she who is lying and he is the one that is truthful. And the reason for this is that the indication would be that in the first instance, that if his shirt was torn from the front, that he was trying to force himself on her, and she, in defending herself, she tore his shirt from the front. And in the second instance, if he was truly trying to run away and she was the one that was plotting and scheming and trying to seduce him, obviously she would be the one that would basically tear his shirt from behind in order to stop him, in order to basically prevent him from exposing her. So this was a very compelling argument and testimony that was presented, and this was very clear for any person to see. And that is why we see that when the Aziz of Misr weighed the evidence that was in front of him, that he looked at the shirt, فَلَمَّا رَأَى قَمِيصَهُ قُدَّ مِن دُبُرٍ, and he saw that it was torn from the back, قَالَ إِنَّهُ مِن كَيْدِكُنْ, he turned to his wife and he said that this is basically certainly from your trickery, from your beguilement, from your plan, right? And inna kaydakunna azim, verily, indeed, your plan is great. Your beguilement, your trickery is great. And he turns around to Sayyidina Yusuf alayhi salam and he tells him, Yusuf a'rid an hadha wastaghfiri li dhanbik innaki kunti min al-khati'in. He turns to Yusuf and he basically tells him that, my beloved son, just let this go. Don't expose this, don't make this public, because this will be an incident of shame. This will, expose and degrade our honor, and station. And he turns to his wife and he says, "Wastaghfiri li dhanbik," that you should seek forgiveness for your sin. Now, the istighfar that is mentioned over here is not the istighfar to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It is not the seeking of forgiveness to Allah, but rather it is the seeking of forgiveness from her husband, or from Sayyidina Yusuf alayhi salam, whom she falsely accused of committing rape, or she falsely accused of rape. And he told her, Innaki kunti min al-khati'in, you are, you were, in fact, you were guilty. You lied and you got caught on your lie. So you should make sure that you seek forgiveness for this. You should apologize, you should say sorry, and you should make amends, because you've been caught out. You're actually a person that has done the wrong. So getting into some of the meanings that are contained within here, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَاسْتَبَقَ الْبَابَ وَقَدَّتْ قَمِيصَهُ, right? Once Sayyidina Yusuf alayhi salam saw that proof from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he basically ran away. He made a run for the door in order to basically get out of that situation. Ulama and scholars mention that the door was locked, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, out of his miracle, made the door to be unlocked, and the lock fell down and the door swung open by itself, and when he reached the door. And it is also mentioned that when they saw the Aziz, she accused him in order to wriggle out of that situation, in order to kind of get out of that situation of she being the one that seduced Sayyidina Yusuf alayhi salam. She immediately turned the tables and accused him of rape. Sayyidina Yusuf alayhi salam, as I mentioned before, may have concealed her fault, but even he could not do that because of the fact that she was the one that first brought it up, and she accused Sayyidina Yusuf alayhi salam. So Sayyidina Yusuf alayhi salam had to defend his honor, out of necessity. And we see that in the next ayah where he says, قَالَ هِيَ رَاوَدَتْنِي عَنْ نَفْسِي, that she was the one that tried to seduce me. She's saying that I did this to her, but in reality, she was the one that that planned all of this and that executed all of this, and now she's not fessing up. So one of the things to understand is that look at the perspective of the Aziz of Misr, right? For this person, this is a very, very delicate and potentially volatile situation, right? Any other person, subhanAllah, would have maybe fallen into such a situation. And this is not a place for like proofs. This is not a place for like, witness statements to gauge who is telling the truth and who is lying. And, it's a very difficult stage for the Aziz of Misr, because on the one hand, this is, his wife. And on the other hand, this is a child that has been raised and reared in his house. He has a lot of love, a lot of connection to this child, to this youngster, to this young man. So in this case, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in order to protect the integrity and the chastity and the virtue of Sayyidina Yusuf alayhi salam, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala caused a miracle to happen. And what is that miracle? We see it in this ayah number 26, that وَشَهِدَ شَاهِدٌ مِّنْ أَهْلِهَا, right? That a witness, right, a person gave testimony, gave a witness statement from her own family. Now, ulama and scholars have differed on the meaning of the shahid, on who this person was. And there is a hadith that is recorded from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in fact used an infant child to bear testimony to the innocence of Sayyidina Yusuf alayhi salam. And this is something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also does in other occasions. We see that on the one occasion, Sayyida Maryam radiallahu anha, right, the mother of Isa alayhi salam, when she was being accused of adultery, of committing zina, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala caused a miracle to take place wherein Sayyidina Isa alayhi salam, her baby, who was a day old, Allah gave him the ability to speak up from the cradle. Allah gave him the ability that not only was he able to speak up from the cradle, but he testified that he was a servant of Allah, and that he had been given nubuwah, and that his mother had not committed any sort of wrong, but rather this was a miracle from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So babies who are generally not able to speak, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala uses this mechanism sometimes in order to make clear that this is a supernatural manifestation of the power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So on the one occasion we find this, that Sayyidina Isa alayhi salam spoke in his cradle. And number two, we find a person, a very a devout and scholarly person in Banu Israel by the name of Jurayj, right? There was a plot that was made against him, and in order to exonerate him, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also caused a baby in the cradle to speak up on his behalf. This was another incident that took place. And the third incident that happens is where we know of the people of the trenches, Ashabul Ukhdud. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about their story in Surah Al-Buruj, where these were certain people that were being oppressed and killed by a tyrant king. And they were the king had ordered trenches to be dug and those trenches to be filled with fire. And whosoever did not believe in him and believed in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he would command that they be thrown into these fire trenches, and thus they would perish. So there was a woman there with her baby, a newborn baby. She witnesses basically that all of her children are thrown into the fire. But the last baby, which is a newborn baby, she was so attached to this baby that she could not take it. And her heart was filled with sorrow, her heart was filled with terror, that what would happen to her baby. And subhanallah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala caused a miracle to happen, that this baby spoke up from the cradle, and he said that, Ya ummah, that, oh my mother, isbiri fa innaka ala al-haq, that have sabr, have patience, for verily you are on the truth, right? And by him making the statement, it strengthened her heart and it strengthened her fortitude. And subhanallah, both she and her baby were thrown into the fire, and there they perished. But subhanallah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave them success in the hereafter. Allah gave them Jannah as a result of that. But the fact of the matter is that this was the third incident wherein a baby also spoke up from the cradle. And the fourth incident that is mentioned is this child that was from Zulaykha's household, this newborn infant that spoke up not only just from the cradle, but also provided such an intellectual, compelling argument that it was very apparent for each and every person who was guilty and who was innocent. This was a great miracle, subhanallah, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala caused to manifest. So where do we find this? In other narrations, it is mentioned that there are up to 10 children that spoke from their cradle. But in the four that has been mentioned over here, this is actually found in the from Ibn Abbas radiallahu an and Abu Hurairah radiallahu an, And this hadith has been recorded actually in Musnad Ahmad, in the Sahih of Ibn Hibban, and in the Mustadrak of Imam Hakim, and they have actually classified this hadith to be a authentic and Sahih hadith in terms of its chain and content. So uh, one of the points to make over here also is that the baby could have simply said that, okay, Yusuf is innocent, Zulaykha is guilty, and that would have been a miracle in itself, right? But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chose to, further manifest his power, that not only did this baby have the ability to speak, but he spoke in such a way that, as I mentioned, that the argument that was made was very compelling and it was very apparent, and this allowed the whole situation to be diffused in the most correct and authentic and fair way. And this is, the manifestation of the power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that any person that will do right by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah will protect them, Allah will honor them, Allah will cherish them, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will protect them from all sorts of evil, of the creation, and anything that would, any sort of harm that would befall him, right? And this would happen through the manifest qudra of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as it happened in the case of Sayyidina Yusuf alayhi salam, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala caused this newborn baby and infant to speak up from the cradle. So this was one of the points. Some of the masail that we take out from this, some of the rulings and injunctions that we take out from the tafsir of these ayat. Number one is that we see that in the beginning in wasabaq al-bab, right, in the ayah number 25, that as soon as Sayyidina Yusuf alayhi salam saw that indication from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that sign from Allah, immediately he sought to leave the environment of that, sin itself, that haram action. So ulama and scholars say that a person, it's not sufficient for a person to simply abandon the sin. But if a person truly wants to change their life around, a person wants to avoid committing that same sin over and over and over again, one of the very first things to do is to make sure you leave that environment, right? And you go to some other place which is more pure, which is conducive for ibadah, for worship, and not for committing sins. So if a person, for example, goes to a bar, they may not be drinking alcohol at the bar, but merely being in the proximity of the alcohol, of people who are drinking, the culture of haram that is permeating that atmosphere, it is not a healthy place to be, right? Even though a person may not be drinking the alcohol themselves, right? So a righteous believer would not remain in environments of sin and vice and things like that. And we see how important environment is. As we mentioned before, that subhanallah, the story of the person who committed 100 murders. First he kills 99 people, then he comes to a monk and he asks that, can I be forgiven? The monk says no, and then he proceeds to kill the monk and completes 100. And then he goes to a scholar of the deen, and the scholar tells him, yes, Allah can forgive you, but one of the most important things is that you cannot remain here. You have to go to the next city, right? You have to go and change your environment. This was one of the most crucial things that was important for that person to be able to be forgiven by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And equally, we take a lesson from this, that we should never ever consciously remain within environments of sin, because even though initially we may not be sinning ourselves, by remaining in that culture, it will most definitely affect a person, and slowly a person will become accustomed to the haram that is being committed in front of them, and they may end up, wanting to taste it. They may end up wanting to, indulge in it, and slowly and surely shaitan will drag the person into that sin itself. That's number one injunction. Number two is keeping up the disobedience of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, no matter if we can see the result of that or not. So in the case of Sayyidina Yusuf alayhi salam, he knew that the door was locked, but yet he's running full force at the door. He's not stopping for anything, so much so to the fact that Zulaykha actually rips his shirt and he still doesn't stop, right? So ulama and scholars say that a person should constantly or should always be in the spirit of displaying their submission to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? Displaying their will to obey Allah and to worship Allah, whether they're able to or not. But the fact of the matter is that the intention and the spirit is something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants to see, right? There is an incident that is mentioned about a very pious and righteous elder, a person who was wrongfully imprisoned. And subhanallah, it is related about this person that, there was no system for this person to pray Jum'ah in prison. But yet, what he would do is that every single Friday, he would get up early, he would, take a bath, he would wash his clothes, he would, dress in the best clothes that he had, and then what he would do is that he would walk to the door. He would walk to the door of his prison cell, and he would say, Ya Allah, I have done whatever is in my power. Ya Allah, I leave the rest to you, right? And he had this, fervent desire that, Ya Allah, I want to pray my Jum'ah Salah. I want to pray my Jum'ah Salah in congregation. And we know that Jum'ah Salah is not valid without a congregation. But the mere fact that this person had this level of desire to please Allah and to fulfill the order of Allah, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives people like this a very high station and maqam and position, right? Spiritually, this is a very, very high level, right? Even though the prison cell, the door may not have opened and the person may not have been able to pray the Jum'ah Salah itself. But the fact that this person displayed this much of effort, in order to please and in order to fulfill the command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not let that type of an effort go to waste. So we should always maintain this spirit. We should always, maintain, our deen, our identity, our worship, no matter where we are, right? A person should not be overcome by their environment, by the people that they're associating with, that what are people going to say? They're going to look at me like I'm a strange person. They're going to look at me in a weird way, in a strange way. How can I practice on my deen? How can I practice on my religion? No, the fact of the matter is that if you worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, especially in the times of adversity, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give you double the reward, right? Double the reward, right? That is actually the test from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that Allah wants to see that do you buckle under the pressure? Do you buckle under the complexes that are around you, the inferiority complex that you might be experiencing, the pressure from your peers, from people that you look up to, from people that you associate, your colleagues, your co-workers? Do you buckle to that pressure? Do their approval mean more to you than the approval of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or not? That is what Allah wants to see. And when a person goes above and beyond to please Allah, discarding the pleasure of the creation, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala truly increases the maqam and the position of such people. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us the tawfiq and the ability that we're able to be from amongst such people with such high ranking and position with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The third point that I would like to mention is that in this case we see that Sayyidina Yusuf alayhi salam was a person that was being accused of something haram. His honor was being tarnished. His reputation was being torn to shreds, right? In a case like this, where a person is being falsely accused, the Sharia teaches us that this is not a place for silence, right? This is not a place for silence. This is not a place to say that, okay, I'll just have tawakkul in Allah and I won't defend myself, right? I will, these people will not, they're not going to believe me anyways. So I'll just, stay quiet. I'll just let them say whatever they want to say, and I'll just put my trust in Allah. No, that is not the solution. The Sharia teaches us that if some injustice like this takes place, you should speak up. And that is why we see that Sayyidina Yusuf alayhi salam spoke up in order to defend his honor, right? In order to defend, himself from the accusation that had been leveled against him, right? So for a person to say that, I will just put my trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah will take care of my haters. Allah will take care of my accusers. That's fine. But you have to defend yourself. You have to defend another person whom you know to be innocent. And especially when their honor and virtue comes into question, Islam teaches us that we need to stand up for the haqq. We need to stand up for justice. Um, in verses number 28 and 29, right? فلما رأى قميصه قد من دبر قال إنه من كيدكن إن كيدكن عظيم. That when her husband saw the shirt of Yusuf alayhi salam ripped from behind, he turned to his wife and he said that this is from your trickery, this is from your plotting. إن كيدكن عظيم. And verily, the plotting of females in general who do this type of plottings, they are, this is a very severe type of applauding. This is something that is a great type of beguilement, a great type of trickery. And then he said, Yusuf, فَأَعْرِضْ عَنْ هَذَا وَاسْتَغْفِرِي لِذَنْبِكِ إِنَّكِ كُنْتِ مِنَ الْخَاطِئِينَ. So one of the points to be made over here is that with the child himself speaking up first, right? A child that is in the cradle, right? Imagine, let's go back to the fact that this was a very delicate situation for the Aziz of Misr, right? He did not know who to believe. He did not know how to handle this situation without it, without it resulting in something that would become volatile. So when the child from the cradle speaks up, that is the first indication that this is a supernatural occurrence that is happening, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is perhaps causing this to happen in order to prove the innocence of Sayyidina Yusuf alayhi salam. Right? So that was the first indication. The second indication is when he actually goes and he sees the proof for himself, that he sees that the shirt of Yusuf alayhi salam, in actuality, it is ripped from the back. It is not ripped from the front. Then he knew in reality that his wife Zulaykha was actually she was guilty, and that is why he turns to her and he chastises her and he says that, what's wrong with you? I know that you're lying. I know that you've just falsely accused him. It was your plan, and you tried to seduce him. So over here, because he knew that his own wife was guilty, we see that he turns to Yusuf alayhi salam and he, seeks, some sort of, he seeks to appease Yusuf alayhi salam by saying that Yusuf, أَعْرِضْ عَنْ هَذَا. You know what? Don't worry about this. Please don't make this public. Please don't, air it out. Keep this concealed, because if this gets out, it's going to be, scandalous. It's going to be, something that's going to degrade our station and position, in the society, in the city itself. And then he turns to his wife and he basically makes her, or tells her, to acknowledge the sin that she had committed, or that she had conspired to commit. One of the important observations to take away from here is that how is it possible that the Aziz of Misr receives this blatant, proof that his wife is actually guilty, and he acknowledges that she is guilty, and he tells her that she should also acknowledge her guilt? How is it possible that he's speaking to her in such a calm way, right? He's not lashing out. He's not getting physical. He's not getting, he's not even getting, verbally abusive in this case. How is it possible that this person is just so cool and calm and collected and he's responding to this? So Allama Qurtubi rahimahullah, he mentions that it could either be that the Aziz of Misr was not a person of morals. He did not really have, a sense of shame like that. He didn't mind, that his wife would be, consorting with other people and would be sleeping around. He didn't have ghira, right? In essence, he didn't have ghira. He didn't have that, sense of shame or a sense of, protectiveness over his wife, over his woman, basically. And the second, possibility is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in protecting the honor and the chastity of Sayyidina Yusuf alayhi salam, first protecting him from the sin itself, then protecting him from the false accusations that had been leveled against him, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, through His qudra, made the mind of the Aziz of Misr to become cool and calm and collected. Because if he had basically seen red at that moment, he had gotten physical, he had lost control of his temper, maybe he would have gotten physical, he would have maybe hit Yusuf, maybe he would have attacked him. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not want the maqam and the position of Sayyidina Yusuf alayhi salam to be tarnished in this way. Is and he protected him in this way by keeping the Aziz of Misr very cool, very calm, to the point where the Aziz of Misr was actually able to weigh the evidences and the circumstances of the shirt being ripped and the child speaking from the cradle. He was able to weigh these things in his mind, and he was able to come to a conclusion that Zulaykha, his wife, was guilty, and Sayyidina Yusuf alayhi salam was innocent. In the following verses, we see in ayah number 30 that despite them trying to keep this affair a hidden, matter, word got out, right? And word spread, and especially, where did it spread? It spread amongst Zulaykha's friends, Zulaykha's, companions, and this was from amongst the position, the women of royalty, or the women that were closely associated. They were basically the wives of the ministers that were close to the Aziz of Misr. So they began to talk amongst themselves and gossip and say that, look at Zulaykha, what's wrong with her? She already has this high station and position, and yet she stooped down to this level that she wanted to commit adultery and zina with her own slave child, right? She's already in this position, yet she degraded herself in this way. And so they basically began to gossip about her, and they began to spread rumors about her and laugh and mock her and jeer at her. And then, subhanallah, we see that when Zulaykha learns of this, what is the plan that she takes, and how she plots to get back at them. And we will inshallah cover that in next week's session, inshallah. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us the tawfiq and the ability that we're able to practice upon whatever we have learned. We're able to take a lesson, we're able to implement it into our lives, and we're able to inshallah pass it on to others. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله لي ولكم ولسائر المسلمين فاستغفروه إنه هو الغفور الرحيم. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.